The last rays of the evening sun stretched across the rugged plains of Montana as former sheriff turned cowboy Jake Dawson guided his horse along a lonely trail that wound through rocky hills and dry grasslands. Years had passed since he had pinned on a sheriff's badge, yet his sharp instincts had never faded. Every unusual sound still caught his attention, every distant movement still stirred the caution that had once kept an entire frontier town safe. That evening, a thick column of black smoke rose beyond a narrow canyon, and Jake immediately sensed that someone was in terrible danger. Tightening the reins, he urged his faithful horse into a gallop, determined to discover the source of the smoke before it was too late. As Jake reached the edge of the canyon, a heartbreaking sight unfolded before his eyes. A wooden wagon burned fiercely beside the trail, its wheels cracking beneath the flames while frightened horses had already broken free and disappeared into the wilderness. Nearby, a terrified young mother named Sarah desperately shielded her little daughter Emily behind a cluster of jagged rocks. Their frightened faces were streaked with dirt and tears, and both trembled as armed bandits slowly surrounded them. The ruthless outlaws laughed confidently, believing their helpless victims had nowhere left to run. The leader demanded that Sarah reveal the location of her family's hidden gold, promising mercy only if she obeyed immediately. Sarah refused to answer despite the danger closing around her. Her only concern was protecting little Emily, who clung tightly to her mother's dress with frightened eyes fixed on the armed men. The gang leader grew impatient, ordering his men to search every bag and broken crate scattered around the burning wagon. When they found nothing of value, his temper exploded. He threatened to separate mother and daughter unless Sarah confessed. Emily buried her face against her mother's shoulder, trying to hide from the terrifying voices surrounding them. Though fear filled the air, Sarah refused to betray her late husband's secret, believing that surrendering to the criminals would never guarantee their safety. Hidden behind a rocky ridge, Jake carefully studied the situation before making his move. He counted 6 heavily armed bandits positioned around the canyon entrance, each watching for any attempt to escape. Charging directly into the middle of them would almost certainly cost him his life, but abandoning an innocent family was something he could never accept. Drawing a slow breath, he remembered countless dangerous confrontations from his years as sheriff. Those memories reminded him that courage alone was never enough. Survival depended on patience, timing, and quick thinking. Jake quietly loaded his rifle, checked his revolver, and prepared a bold plan that relied on surprise rather than overwhelming force. Without warning, a powerful rifle shot echoed across the canyon walls. One bandit's hat flew from his head as the bullet struck the rock beside him, causing instant panic among the gang. Before anyone could identify the shooter, Jake galloped into view atop his powerful horse, shouting loudly to draw every outlaw's attention. Dust exploded beneath the horse's hooves as he raced between towering rocks, firing carefully aimed warning shots that forced the bandits to dive for cover. Believing an entire group of lawmen had arrived, several criminals scattered in confusion. The unexpected attack created exactly the distraction Jake had hoped for, giving Sarah and Emily their first real chance to escape. Jake shouted for Sarah to grab Emily and run toward the narrow passage leading deeper into the canyon. Though terrified, she trusted the stranger, risking everything to save them. Holding Emily's hand tightly, Sarah hurried across the rough ground while Jake continued drawing the bandits away with calculated movements. Every second mattered. He never wasted a bullet, aiming only when necessary while constantly changing positions to make the gang believe several armed riders surrounded them. The clever deception slowed their pursuit, allowing the frightened mother and daughter to disappear behind massive rock formations where the criminals could no longer see them. Jake smiled briefly, knowing the first part of his dangerous plan had succeeded. The bandit leader quickly realized they had been fooled by a single cowboy. Furious, he ordered every man to hunt Jake down before searching for the escaping family again. Their horses thundered through the canyon as the criminals spread across the rocky landscape. Jake understood he could not defeat all of them in an open fight, so he relied on the land itself. He guided his horse through narrow trails known only to experienced ranchers, weaving between steep cliffs and dry creek beds that slowed his pursuers. Each twist and turn bought precious minutes for Sarah and Emily, who struggled to climb the rugged path leading toward higher ground and temporary safety. As darkness slowly settled over Montana's wilderness, cold winds swept through the canyon while distant wolves howled among the hills. Sarah and Emily finally reached a sheltered cave where they paused to catch their breath. Emily asked quietly whether the brave cowboy would survive, and Sarah looked toward the fading light with silent concern. She had never met Jake before that evening, yet he had willingly placed himself between them and certain death without asking for anything in return. She whispered a heartfelt prayer for the stranger whose courage had given them hope when every escape seemed impossible. Far below, the sound of distant gunfire still echoed through the valley. Jake eventually reached the hidden cave after successfully losing the pursuing outlaws. His clothes were dusty, his face carried fresh scratches, and exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders, yet his determination remained unshaken. Sarah thanked him with tears in her eyes, but Jake simply nodded and assured her they were not safe yet. He explained that the bandits would search every trail before sunrise, leaving little time to rest. The nearest town lay many miles away beyond dangerous mountain passes. If they hoped to survive, they would need to travel through the darkness while avoiding every patrol the gang sent into the wilderness. Their greatest challenge had only just begun. Before leaving the shelter of the cave, Jake carefully studied the stars to determine the safest direction through the mountains. He wrapped Emily in a warm blanket taken from his saddlebag and helped Sarah prepare for the difficult journey ahead. Though fear still lingered in every heart, a quiet sense of hope began replacing despair. Jake promised that as long as he could stand, no bandit would ever lay another hand on them. Unknown to the three travelers, the ruthless gang had already surrounded the canyon once again, blocking every obvious escape route and preparing one final deadly ambush before the first light of dawn appeared over the Montana horizon. Before the first light of dawn touched the Montana mountains, Jake Dawson quietly saddled his horse outside the hidden cave. The cold air carried an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant cry of an eagle soaring above the cliffs. Sarah wrapped Emily in a warm blanket while Jake carefully studied the narrow trail ahead. It was an old mountain path used decades earlier by trappers and ranchers unknown to most travelers. If fortune remained on their side, it would lead them safely to the nearest town before the bandits realized where they had gone. Every minute mattered, and Jake refused to waste even one. The three travelers moved carefully through the winding mountain trail, avoiding loose stones that could reveal their location. Jake rode ahead, watching every ridge and shadow with the alert eyes of a man who had survived countless dangerous situations. Sarah walked beside her daughter, encouraging Emily with gentle words whenever exhaustion slowed her steps. Although the little girl was frightened, she trusted the brave cowboy completely. The rising sun slowly painted the distant peaks with golden light, giving them hope that freedom was finally within reach. None of them realized several fresh horse tracks behind them revealed their escape to the ruthless gang. Only moments later, the peaceful morning shattered as angry voices echoed through the canyon below. The bandits had discovered the hidden trail and were racing after them on horseback. Jake immediately understood they would never outrun experienced riders across the steep mountains. He quickly led Sarah and Emily toward a narrow mountain pass where only one horse could ride through at a time. Turning to Sarah, he calmly explained that he would remain behind and stop the gang while she continued toward the town. Though tears filled her eyes, Sarah knew arguing would only waste precious seconds they could not afford. Jake waited alone at the entrance of the rocky pass while Sarah and Emily disappeared around the next bend. The narrow trail forced the pursuing riders into a single line, preventing them from attacking together. Resting his rifle against a large boulder, Jake steadied his breathing and watched the first outlaw appear between the cliffs. His warning shot struck the ground directly before the horse, forcing it to rear backward and block the riders behind it. Confusion spread instantly through the gang as the narrow path became crowded with frightened horses, shouting men and rolling rocks that echoed across the mountainside. The furious gang leader ordered his men forward despite the danger, believing numbers alone would overwhelm the lone cowboy. Jake refused to panic. Every bullet was fired with careful purpose, striking rocks above the trail and sending heavy stones crashing into the narrow pass. Dust filled the air, reducing visibility and slowing the attackers even further. Several frightened horses refused to continue, throwing their riders onto the rocky ground. Jake used every moment wisely, changing positions after each shot so the outlaws believed several defenders were hidden among the cliffs. His experience as a former sheriff once again proved more powerful than reckless violence. Meanwhile, Sarah and Emily continued climbing toward the mountain ridge with every ounce of strength they possessed. Emily looked back repeatedly, frightened by the distant sounds of gunfire echoing through the valley. Sarah silently prayed that Jake would survive long enough to escape. She remembered his promise that he would protect them no matter the cost, and that promise gave her the courage to keep moving. At last they spotted smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. A small frontier town rested beyond the hills, offering the first real hope of safety since the terrifying attack beside the burning wagon. Back at the narrow pass, Jake noticed the gang leader searching for another way around the cliffs. Realizing the battle could soon change, he quickly climbed onto higher ground overlooking the trail. From there, he spotted a dangerously unstable section of rock balanced above the canyon wall. Waiting patiently until the bandits gathered beneath it, Jake fired one perfectly aimed shot. The bullet shattered the weakened rock, triggering a thunderous landslide that crashed into the narrow trail below. Huge boulders rolled through the pass, scattering frightened horses and forcing the surviving bandits to retreat in complete confusion before they were crushed beneath the falling stone. The ruthless gang leader refused to surrender despite losing control of his men. Furious and desperate, he climbed a separate ridge hoping to surprise Jake from behind. Jake noticed the movement at the last possible moment and quickly drew his revolver. Instead of firing recklessly, he lured the outlaw onto loose gravel near the canyon's edge. As the bandit charged forward, the unstable ground collapsed beneath his horse. Both rider and horse tumbled into the deep rocky ravine below. Seeing their feared leader disappear, the remaining criminals lost every ounce of courage and fled across the mountains without looking back. Jake leaned against a weathered pine tree, breathing heavily as the silence finally returned to the valley. His shoulder ached from a grazing bullet and exhaustion weighed upon every step, but relief filled his heart. He had kept his promise. Mounting his faithful horse once again, he slowly followed the trail toward town. When Sarah spotted him riding through the gates, tears streamed down her face. Emily ran forward and hugged the cowboy who had risked everything to save them. For the first time since their nightmare began, the frightened family truly believed they had escaped the darkness forever. News of the heroic rescue spread quickly throughout the frontier town. Ranchers, merchants, and local families gathered outside the church to welcome the survivors home. The town sheriff organized a posse that captured the remaining bandits before they could escape the territory, finally ending their long reign of fear across Montana. Standing beside the church as the morning sun filled the valley, Sarah thanked Jake with tears of gratitude, calling him the man who had restored their future when all hope seemed lost. Jake simply smiled, tipped his cowboy hat, and quietly rode toward the open plains, knowing that protecting innocent lives would always remain his greatest reward.